Michel Matriki, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So we're gonna hear shortly from Dr. Larabi Jaïdi, who is a prominent expert in Morocco. He's now a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, but also professor at Mohammed VI University. And also he's been an advisor to the Minister of Economy and Finance, Prime Minister, and involved in key commissions that have thought through the development path of Morocco. We're gonna talk a bit, he's gonna do a presentation about sort of the road of industrial policy or the path of industrial policy in Morocco. And then we're gonna have an interview with him, going a bit more in details of the choice of sectors, what has worked in some sectors, what hasn't worked in others. And the session, so the presentation of Dr. Jaïdi is going to be in French.
I was asked to present some sort of input delivery about the evolution of the Moroccan growth. But before deep diving on different success stories in Morocco and the evolution of the Moroccan economy, especially in the industry, I just wanted to highlight the structuring transformation in Morocco, and indeed on a long-term basis, because the structuring transformation is no easy business. It takes a lot of time, and it requires different levers, and of course highlighting performances within in the aircraft or the automotive industry is about understanding the macroeconomic environment, political choices, and of course the different stakeholders, the different drivers. So we are going to analyze those three stakeholders: changes, reforms being performed and conducted downstream in the business environment, in the economic environment, and the changes between the different stakeholders, private sector, the governments, and the professional association. And in the same time, what are the changes that have happened in the sectorial policies to build a momentum in a transparent and crystal clear environment with different stakeholders abiding by rules, patterns, and norms. So this is a prerequisite of the performances of the sectorial boost in Morocco. Why the structuring or structural transformation? Morocco in the 80s went through a harsh crisis, a very difficult crisis, leading to a financial dead-end street. Morocco was in big trouble because the currencies were most known, with a very poor growth, the international environment which was quite gloomy. Thus, the first reforms, the one following these structuring reforms from the World Bank, which have boosted a major impulse by leveraging the economic environment to better manage the debt and to highlight different choices of different policies like the tax policy and others. So the structuring transformation started in the mid-80s. It has speeded up in the 1994 because behind the speeding up, it's not only about technical reforms, but it's about creating an institutional environment that could capture all the different opportunities. I'm talking about institutional reforms, policy and politics reforms to open the political scape and to embark different stakeholders in the economic momentum. Why this structuring transformation? Because in between 84 and 94, many reforms have been implemented. Horizontal reforms from an economic standpoint. However, we noticed that they did not have enough impact to boost growth for a sustainable and durable growth to ramp up the Moroccan economy. So the question was the following. Did we have to transform the productive industry by opting from very clear economic choices to better combine macroeconomic reforms and microeconomics reforms with a mesoeconomic approach, meaning sectorial reforms to prioritize different industries and to open the way to a structuring transformation. Because to get to a next stage, we needed to get out of this standstill positioning in different industries where added value were not good enough, just not good enough. So behind this questioning, this challenge regarding the different industries, we had to question how to reach a sustainable growth and how to win the battle of competitiveness, because in the 84, Morocco has undertaken an opening process, speeding up in the 90s with the different associations, with the free trade agreements, and Morocco was implementing a free trade process, not only with Europe and the United States, the main two partners, but even the Arab world. And Morocco was looking for enriching free trade agreements with China, with Canada, with Turkey, with whom we have signed a bilateral agreement. So we had a proliferation of multilateral agreements, free trade agreements, and the proliferation of those agreements were to liberalize the challenges and to give some good signals to the international business environment. The industrial national fabric was not enough prepared, but we wanted to send a signal to the international business environment to make Morocco attractive. So within this evolution, the stake was to increase the competitiveness of the Moroccan economy, and increasing the competitiveness means that an economic fabric which is too fragile, with SMEs and SMBs and small companies, had to raise. And the second point, we were in the middle of a stagnation with a lack of industrialization, and we had to allow to the industrial fabric to have a boost with some strong incentives and with a strong visibility. Second point was the productivity, which was going down, and productivity is at the heart, the core of the profitability, because the relation between capital and the labor could not reach enough efficiency, and more to the point, the openness, the opening was an objective to address the challenge of productivity and profitability. That's why these sectorial policies were high on the political agenda at that time. To strengthen the macroeconomic factors and to win the competitiveness battle. The competitiveness battle was a holistic approach, not only leveraging on training, on innovation and the combination of different factors, but to try to create a synergy between the different stakeholders, to try to create a momentum to be able to have a cost of labor that will be relevant in order to help and to support the businesses to transform their labor and their payroll environment. Consequently, we opted and we decided to check which kind of industries we had to promote. Morocco had a medium range experience in terms of industry. We had a textile industry, a little bit of agro-food industry, some mechanic and machinery and electronic industry, but the overall fabric was too poor, a very low added value challenge, a lack of technicity because the domestic market was closed, but by opening, it was a great opportunity to give momentum the old industries and at the same time to look for new industries like the aircraft industry and other industries like the car industry, the automotive industry. Stellantis, Peugeot, and Renault. Somaca was the government-run car industry in Morocco. That's why Morocco, in this structuring transformation, was looking for the orientations, the mechanisms, if we wanted to change the productive industry, which lever should we implement to increase our capacity to competitiveness? And the reforms, the industrial reforms, and the sectorial choices that were favored in 1994 up to 2005 were a series of reforms. Most of the time we talk about the car industry and the aircraft industry, but Morocco, during this time, Morocco had 10 sectorial strategies, more than 10 strategies: farming, industry, fishing, logistics, supply chain, tourism, distribution. So Morocco had opted for a structuring reform upon on modernization and on the dynamization of all the existing industries, something like 10 industries. Within these 10 industries, the priority was given to the car industry because the structuring transformation from a primary sector to the secondary sector was a major challenge to address the international competition. The globalization, free trade agreement were a major asset to conduct this transformation. That's why we managed to deeply root the Moroccan strategy, getting the Moroccan industry out of the out of a sector which was too poor. So we managed to build an ecosystem between the industries and branches. We developed clusters and we took into consideration the territorial environment by welcoming new generation companies with new generation clusters, and we wanted to give to the territories and the region a major role to play in this momentum. we didn't want to organize this process relying on the state centralization. That's why this strategy was about decentralizing, and we wanted to amend, to modify the relation between the market, the state. The state had to transform itself, trying to wave down on the bureaucracy, to build a state open with the private sector. The private sector also had to transform itself by becoming bolder, showing a strong ambition, and to try to boost the industrial fabric. And in the same time, we needed to have the professional associations to be strengthened to become strong decision takers, actors, and drivers. So emergence, a strong boost of the ecosystem, and a major challenge, the strong, sound, and fair governance to build visibility and to get some strong involvement with the different stakeholders in this transformation. Indeed, this bold vision, following the implementation of this transformation, what could we say? What can we say? Has Morocco achieved to address these challenges? What are the next challenges to develop those points? It's also a structuring transformation with some shadows and darkness, with pros and cons.
D'évoquer notamment dans le jeu des acteurs et dans le développement des clusters, mais aussi des ombres. Des ombres pourquoi?
Some dark points, of course, some setbacks and drawbacks to our growth is some sort of fluctuating, that you can never have a steady and sustainable growth, but the different levels shows that there are ups and downs in the growth linked to the economic capacity to address the external shocks and domestic shocks. So you need to have a sustainable and durable growth on a long-term basis, and to do that, you need to act on different levers to try to mitigate the impact of the volatility, international volatility, and especially the structuring transformation aimed to win the competitiveness with the opening to the foreign markets. We realize that the economic growth model in Morocco is driven by the domestic consumption rather than by exportation. This is something which is quite strange. And this structuring transformation enable to a swift farming share within the GDP. Some may say that there is no industrialization in Morocco. There are not even fluctuation. But we need to be very cautious when we talk about the industrialization, the early industrialization, the topic which was developed about the developing country industrialization. What we need to read when we talk about structural transformation is in the intrasectorial and not in the intersectorial. And we need to have the right perspective. What has happened in the farming industry when we change the different branches, what has happened in the industry to change the products and the branches, what has happened in the services industry, coming from traditional to modern services, we will realize that the structuring transformation is there, even though if the scope is not as big as we could expect. More to the point, within the shadow, within the dark side of this process is the fact that growth does not generate enough jobs, enough employment.
au détriment d'un marché du travail.
It was made at the expenses of the job market, which cannot absorb the surplus of labor
Et donc, en fait,
getting out from the farming industry. And we have a growth
peu créatrice d'emplois,
which does not create not enough jobs, and which is not inclusive at all, especially when we talk about incomes, generation of incomes.
dilemme
So the dilemma of the competitiveness has been addressed, but the impact of this competitiveness on the social progress and on the social development and on inequities has not been addressed in a relevant manner.
l'ombre
And still on the dark side of the structuring transformation, we should address two main points. I'm talking about the human capital, which is the weakest point of development,
peut-être qu'un certain nombre d'entreprises
because
sont
some
à la recherche de
businesses
profils,
are looking
nouvelles
for
compétences.
profiles, new skills, new competencies that they cannot find on the job markets.
Cette réalité
And
du chômage
this
est une
reality,
réalité qui montre
this
l'inadéquation des profils de la
the
formation.
joblessness, unemployment issue is the outcome of the structuring transformation.
Au-delà de ce capital
More
humain,
to this point,
d'innovation qui
innovation.
reste
Innovation
manquant.
remains
L'innovation dans nos économies
remains
reste encore une innovation
too poor.
importée, mais
Innovation is mainly
managée
imported.
par les grands
It is
opérateurs,
mainly
les investisseurs
managed and
qui sont
imported by
les grands
big
entreprises.
international stakeholders, especially for
Un
the
truc
car
qui est, à mon
industry.
avis, extrêmement important, je ne
Something
parle
else
pas trop là-dessus,
which is more important,
c'est, le volet relatif
the
à-
section
aux réformes.
about reforms.
Si vous prenez le Maroc sur la
If you
du
take Morocco into
vous
consideration
êtes impressionné
over the
par
past
le
20,
nombre de
25 years,
réformes
you may be impressed by the number of reforms that have
qui
been
sont
launched.
le processus de réforme est
Of
un
course,
processus
the
qui
reform
maîtrisé.
process should be well mastered for the reform
général
not
qui
being
reste
a law, a legal framework without
surtout les réformes
efficiency. And
démocratiques
of
par
course,
les
the
acteurs,
reform should
donc
be,
négociées et assimilées par
of
les
course,
acteurs.
embraced and accepted by the different stakeholders. Different reforms which have been implemented
Évidemment, c'est le rôle de l'État, impulsé par l'État,
were
avec un
boosted
certain
by
implication,
the state and the government.
concertation que de l'implication.
It was
Donc, soit la réforme
not enough
a une lenteur dans cette
involvement.
et donc
It was rather a consultation rather than an involvement.
de l'acteur industriel ou autre, ou alors c'est une réforme accélérée.
Sometimes we're talking
capacité
about
d'absorption
accelerated reforms which are not able to be accepted by the different stakeholders. It's a dilemma that we are noticing when we talk about reforms in Morocco. And
L'autre volet
more to the point,
qui nous apparaît
another very important
inviter
section
les acteurs
is
à
about
s'impliquer
inviting the different stakeholders to get involved, especially from the private sector, to ask them to transform themselves and to be a major stakeholders as far as investment is
le
involved.
profil de l'investisseur.
However,
C'est un profil qui est
the investment profile in Morocco is rather boosted by
l'apport
public
d'investissement
companies,
et dans une
government-run
mesure,
companies.
l'investissement privé national. Pourquoi
Why?
Tout simplement parce que, encore
Because
une fois, un des paradoxes de ces réformes,
one of the paradox of these reforms
l'arbitrage du secteur privé a été peut-être
have made that the arbitration of this process was rather in favor to the real estate environment.
Donc voilà, enfin, quelles sont,
So
à mon avis, enfin, les ombres sur lesquelles
those
pèse
are the different
transformation structurelle
mm,
pour pouvoir la
darkness
Mais l'essentiel,
covering
c'est qu'en fait,
this process. But at the end of the day, any kind of transformation process calls for a macroeconomic stability and an institutional stability, and in the same time, it is transformation process where economic stakeholders can build reforms with a very strong strategic steering and with a strong political will. Political leadership is very important. Moroccan institutions can enable this process because at the end of the day, the king is the leader of the nation opting for the right transformation and showing the way, paving the way to transformation, especially during the 2011 constitution reform. And at the end of the day, the different role played by the parliaments and other institutions from the civil society can be a very important factor to embark in those reforms. It's a long-term process. To build a macroeconomic and political stability would be onboarded by all the different institutions in order to build a strong structuring transformation. A new approach has been launched over the past years with new levers that we need to activate to boost the institutional reforms. And Morocco has undertaken a strong movement in this way. And thank you very much.
Okay, great. So I'm with all of you wearing the the translator, and thank you to the translator at the back. You're doing a great job. So I'm Oliver Hanney, the managing editor at VoxDev, which is a website that covers a bunch of development economics and basically tries to make it accessible to people and focus on the more interesting and important parts for policymakers. And over the past few months, Kartik Kuliswaran and myself have been having conversations with policymakers from a range of countries, some of which are in the export boom atlas, basically about the nitty-gritty of growth and how kind of you move from these big growth strategies to getting stuff done on the ground. And we've covered Costa Rica, Peru, and Vietnam. And today we're going to be doing a deep dive into Morocco's industrial transformation over the past 2 decades. We're mostly going to be focusing on 2 sectors, which are automotives, and linked to that, the story of the Tangier port, and then also fertilizers, which has been in the news a lot recently because of the wild price fluctuations. Gemma, I'll hand over to you, and I think we need a... is it working? Okay. Yeah, and we also need a new translate gadget. But Gemma, over to you.
Thank you, Olivier. I'm going to speak in French. Thank you, Mr. Jaïdi, for your excellent presentation. Very technical. We can discuss it days and days. One of the ways to look at the structural transformation in Morocco is not only to see the turning point in 2005 with the emergence plan Morocco, but also the process that Morocco followed, an update of its plans and key sectors that were selected, but also an update of different approaches. For example, automotives, they started by attracting foreign investments, and then in 2014 there was a shift or a focus on developing clusters and relations between key investors and operators. It's a holistic process, very important in the structural transformation of Morocco. But it also creates new problems because when you start, you try to resolve existing problems, but by creating new processes, you create new problems. There is no growth without problems, right? So my question is about 2005. How come there was this turning point in 2005 with horizontal industrial policies, but also policies focused on key sectors that were innovative in these times? For example, if we compare it with Tunisia, even though in French we say that comparison is not reason. So maybe we can compare the two. But the main question is, what about the intellectual, the institutional change to achieve this turning point in 2005?
Oui, et c'est vrai que
Yes, it is true that 2003-2004 was a turning point in terms of industrial policies by selecting the emergence plan and all the other plans that followed and ecosystem approaches. It's all about continuity. In 2004 can't be actually understood as a turning point if we don't understand the past, but also the prerequisites. And the maturity that was required. When I talk about maturity, I'm not only talking about the 80s, even though for me the turning point, the real one, was in 1994. It was a political turning point. It created a real political space with integrating the left and all its components that enabled us to create a certain stability. And this was the beginning of a political trust, not only within Morocco, but also for our foreign partners, demonstrating and showcasing that Morocco is transforming its institutions. And the fact that the transition between the two kings was very soft, and it consolidated the process, the political process, and as I mentioned, it enabled trust. Of course, there were some tensions, some contradictions, but the most pertinent element is that the transition was soft. So, in my opinion, 1994 is the most important year because this maturity process started there. Of course, we needed a more sustainable continuity and more sustainable processes in different sectors and industries. It is also, in my opinion, a debate about sectorial strategies or new strategic planning. Which one should we choose? It is a very important issue, a very important question to be asked, because Morocco, we're not talking here about the structural program. Morocco is all about planning, state planning, budget planning. But the ancient formulas were run out of breath. So it was all about establishing new choices, but not only the state, other, big players, big actors in the market. This is why it was an accumulation of different strategies within Morocco. And today we're still asking the same question, beyond the choice. What is the coherence? The convergence, enabling us to understand how the resources are allocated. And how it is impacting the growth. Now, why 2004? Because Morocco implemented a certain number of expertise to understand what will be the best approach to its development. And the automotive sector was one of these industries. Why? Because we already had an existing automotive sector, but it ran out of steam. So we needed to renew it. The automotive sector needed to be renewed or to be revitalized. Because the global automotive industry was changing and was developing, so we needed to open up a bit more on these international and global scene. Hence the choice and the opportunity to talk to Renault and other French brands. But the real opportunity here is that Renault was looking for a partner. They started by a partnership with Turkey, and then maybe they were looking to invest in Tunisia, but in Tunisia there were no existing structure. But in Morocco there was already a sector of, assembly factors and other like, for example, the Somaka plant. So Morocco capitalized on the existing Somaka plant. And at the same time, it implemented many incentives, like, for example, the Tangemed port with all the connectivity infrastructure that were installed, and other negotiations. And the negotiations that Morocco started with Renault weren't the only ones. Morocco was negotiating with Malaysia and with South Korea. So there was this will, to revitalize its automotive industry. But I don't want to use this term, but it wasn't a success. It was a kind of failure with some countries, but it was a success with Renault, because Renault was looking to invest in another country, and Morocco was attractive because it has an institutional and political stability.
Great. And then I wanted to move on a bit to kind of something that you mentioned when you were talking about kind of the next step that countries take when they move from attracting multinationals and doing this kind of assembly and export. This was something that has come up across our conversations in Vietnam and Costa Rica, and a lot of the policymakers there they have succeeded in this first step of attracting foreign direct investment, but then the step after that is trying to capture more of the value within their own country. So I was wondering how that's going in Morocco, whether that's something that you have any ideas about in terms of more local content, more local content, more engineering in Morocco, more design, more testing, maybe now more electric vehicle related tasks. What does that next phase require for Morocco?
De quoi a-t-on besoin pour la prochaine étape?
Vous posez une question extrêmement
Your
importante.
question is extremely important because it's not about localizing a local expert or operator. Either it's in the aeronautic industry or the automotive industry. It's all about ensuring that this dynamic is all about the rise of the value chain of goods, simple goods, but others, more technological, but also to introduce, and this is the global stakes, introduce innovation in production, in the process. So
Ce que l'on observe, c'est qu'évidemment,
what we are
de toute façon, les
observing
opérateurs mondiaux,
is that
que ce soit Renault,
global
que ce soit
operators,
Stellantis,
either it's Peugeot or
sont
Renault,
conscients des enjeux.
they
Parce qu'en fait, leurs
know
produits
all about the
ne
stakes
sont pas
because
destinés au marché intérieur.
their products are not
à une classe
destined
moyenne,
to
nationale, qui
the
peut se contenter. Aujourd'hui même,
national or
l'ouverture du monde
domestic
fait en sorte que
market.
même nos classes
It's
moyennes en
destined
Afrique
to
sont exigences en termes de
to
qualité, de
more
publicité,
global
etc.
markets.
Donc, ces grands opérateurs
These
sont soucieux de
operators,
l'intégration de la
big
chaîne de valeur interne.
operators,
D'ailleurs,
are
on est avec
all
elles.
about the value chain. This is why
Cette année à Tanger,
Renault
à Casablanca,
attracted
Peugeot aussi.
250 other companies in Tangier, in Kenitra, with multiple components, and this outsourcing works for the operator, but also for the country and for the global markets. They are attracted by the national and international or global markets. So in this
Les
sense,
grands opérateurs mondiaux ne peuvent pas ignorer
we can't
les transformations qui sont en
ignore
cours dans
the
leur secteur.
ongoing transformation in a sector, and in the automotive sector, the most important thing is the transition to electrical vehicles with the Chinese competition that is growing, rapidly growing.
En s'attaquant aussi
So we need
à ces grandes entreprises sont
to
aussi
understand that these
grands opérateurs
big operators or
aussi dans
big
une situation de
companies
tension.
are
Donc, la volonté de
also
capitaliser sur leur tissu industriel
facing
local,
some
avec leur
tensions
valeur,
because
mais avec aussi,
there is a
l'incitation
rise
de leur
of
pays
the
d'origine
value
à
chain, but
relocaliser.
there's also a need
Ou en tout
to
cas, notamment s'il y a
relocate their
un tournant dans
businesses
l'énergie et dans la voiture électrique,
to
que ce
their
tournant soit
own
négocié
countries.
et localisé à l'intérieur de ces pays. Mais je pense que ces
But I
opérateurs, en fait,
think
quelles que soient
that
les incitations que mènent leurs
no
États
matter the
respectifs pour le
incentives,
localiser, restent dans une logique
these
de compétition mondiale.
operators are all
Ils cherchent
about
là où l'avantage
global
comparatif est le plus important.
competitiveness.
Pas tout simplement en termes de coût de
It's
main-d'œuvre,
not about
parce que
costs,
le coût de la main-d'œuvre dans l'industrie automobile marocaine, c'est
labor cost, because the labor cost
plus
in
bas que celui de
the
la coût de la
automotive
main-d'œuvre dans l'industrie
sector
française,
in Morocco
mais il se situe
is,
dans une moyenne relativement élevée
of
par rapport aux autres
course,
pays émergents. Bien.
not
D'autant
the
plus que la question
same,
des
and
compétences fait en sorte que
of
les
course,
salaires soient élevés.
it's
Mais cette disponibilité des compétences qui est importante.
but it's the availability
C'est là
of
que le levier de la
competitiveness
formation
that is important. This
Mais il ne
is
suffit
why I think
L'enjeu
that
aujourd'hui, c'est
training
comment
is important,
maîtriser
but
non
it's not
seulement la
enough.
remontée de la
The
chaise de valeur,
challenge
mais
today
aussi
is to
se
understand
localiser
how
dans,
to
des fenêtres d'innovation
to
qui permettent de
understand
capitaliser
the innovation windows that will enable us to
Cela interpelle
capitalize
non seulement
on
l'opérateur,
the different
Renault
sectors.
et
This
Stellantis
involves
ont créé un
the
certain nombre de
operator,
laboratoires
but also the country that
pour l'innovation
where
dans
the
l'industrie
operator
automobile. Ça fait
invests.
partie
For
aussi
example, for the
de
automotive
leur paysage
sector,
de
it's
l'innovation en Europe. Il y a
all
aussi des
about
avantages
the
comparatifs
innovation
dans
landscape. There are
l'innovation.
also comparative
qu'on peut délocaliser,
advantages
l'innovation qui est
in
gardée en fabrique.
innovation.
Donc, il y a saisir
Delocalized, for
de cette
example,
opportunité, vu
innovation
les compétences
is
humaines
important.
disponibles, vu les
It's all
incitations sur la question
about,
produits
of course,
financiers
incentives, but also
à
human
délocaliser certaines
capacities
composantes de
that
l'innovation
are
pour nous.
available. So
Mais la grande question,
the
c'est pas celle de la
big
remontée de la chaîne de
issue
valeur
or question
avec
is
un
not
taux
about
d'intégration
the value
appréciable
chain with
ou
an
jouer
integration
aussi
rate,
sur
an important
l'innovation pour
integration
garder
rate,
et
or
consolider
an
l'acquis.
innovation to consolidate
de
the
la diffusion
existing advantages. It's also about the dissemination of the
L'implication
whole
dans cet
process to other systems, to
jusqu'à
other
présent,
sectors.
cette
But
implication
up
des entreprises
till
marocaines
today, the
dans les écosystèmes
implication of other
de ça
Moroccan
discuter.
companies are
Ça
is
ne veut
not
pas dire que
that
les
important.
acteurs
This doesn't
principaux
mean that the main players
ne
or
souhaitent pas
actors
s'ouvrir sur
don't
l'entreprise marocaine. Non.
want to
Intérêt à capitaliser
invest
sur
or
le
to
chaîne de valeur
integrate or
en
to
exploitant ce qui est acquis ou
implicate
en poussant
other
par les entreprises
Moroccan
marocaines à se
companies
positionner dans
or
un certain nombre de segments de cette chaîne de
it's
valeur.
actually about
De
all
l'interpelle,
about positioning.
l'État
So
et des
the
entreprises
Moroccan
marocaines
state and the
avoir
government and the Moroccan
capacité
companies need
de
to be
restructuration
able
d'entreprises
to
marocaines, que ça monte en
restructure
taille
themselves and
Voilà.
to
d'une petite entreprise taille
to
faible à une
transition
petite
from
entreprise
a
de taille moyenne,
small
intermédiaire,
enterprise to
avec
a
évidemment un
medium
mode
one
d'organisation,
or
de
a
management, etc.
bigger one,
Et surtout des choix de
and
positionnement dans telle
to
filière de cet écosystème qui est
select
favorable à la
or to
consolidation
choose
de ce tissu global.
a good positioning.
Pour continuer sur l'automobile et les succès,
To
évidemment, énormément
talk about
choses
furthermore
intéressantes
about
de
the
l'entrepreneuriat.
success of the automotive sector in Morocco. One of the key factors of this success is the industrial zone and the Tangemed port. It's the first port in terms of capacity in the Mediterranean region. Morocco is not comparing itself to only African countries, but also European ones. So what about the industrial zones and how we can develop them? What is interesting in Morocco is that it was state financed, or at least at the beginning, it was a 100 public investment or state investment. This showcases the capacities of investment of the Moroccan state and the Moroccan government. But beyond state financing, what is, in your opinion, the three key factors, if you can sum them up, that enabled Tangemed to become a success?
Oui, premièrement, c'est le premier
First
facteur de
of
succès, c'est
all,
le choix de la
the
localisation.
first key factor is the
Pourquoi j'évoque cette question? Parce que
choice of location.
Infrastructure portuaire pour un port nouveau, parce que Caja, qui est congestionné,
Casablanca, for example, was
est investi évidemment
congested, and we had other, fisheries ports and transport ports in other regions in Morocco.
transport maritime, c'est l'Atlantique. Premier projet qui
But
était
the
pensé,
first
c'était
projects
de la
that
Haïti.
Morocco thought about is the Atlantic coast.
Et il faut le reconnaître, c'est
And
la plus haute autorité du pays, le roi, qui avait
the
décidé de localiser
king,
cette
the highest authority of the country, that decided, is
par
it intuition, was it by consultation, reflection? Anyway,
la localisation se
the
fasse là pour
king
raison aussi simple.
insisted that the port
Premièrement, en termes de
needed to be
capacité de réaliser le
constructed
port dans un délai
in
relativement court, la
Tangier and
Méditerranée,
in the
plus simple
Atlantic
que
coast.
l'Atlantique, qui est une mer agitée.
In the Mediterranean, sorry. So there was also the cost for the infrastructure. It is less,
Du coup,
the
un des champs,
cost is
l'Atlantique, c'est peut-être le
not
nord-sud
as
de la
important
Méditerranée, ça peut être à
when
la
it's
fois
the
le nord-sud
Mediterranean
et l'est-ouest.
coast
Et les grands courants
comparing
des
to the
changements mondiaux
Atlantic.
partaient
So
de l'Asie.
all this
vers
was
l'Amérique,
taken into consideration.
Évidemment, enfin, d'autres
There was
tissus, mais disons que la
also
Méditerranée était un
other
Donc, le choix de la
criteria,
localisation peut
like,
être extrêmement important.
for example, the
Deuxième facteur de
geographic
réussite,
position.
c'est
The second key factor
le fait de créer une agence dédiée
to create
à
a dedicated
le montage et la
agency
réalisation
or
des aspects enfin, techniques,
organization
avec un processus de montée
dedicated
aussi
to the technical
capacité.
process
Tangemed,
with
c'est
a
Tangemed 1,
purpose
Tangemed 2,
to
maintenant c'est
increase
Monado,
their
etc.
capacities,
Donc,
because
c'est un processus
first of all there was
qui a fait en sorte.
Tangemed 1, then
Une
we
capacité aussi de donner
built
des opérateurs
Tangemed 2
maritimes
and so on and
de
so
grands
forth.
groupes
And
internationaux
there's also the
qui portaient un portefeuille
the fact that the port needed to attract different productivity capacities by attracting the biggest maritime operators, and this is what Morocco did. Furthermore, Morocco has Al Jazeera in the north, but also Valence, and they were saturated. So there was this opportunity for Morocco to capitalize on this. So it integrated many variables because it's not only port for transport or for transshipment. It's there. We built also an industrial zone. Renault, for example, built one because Tanger had existing industrial zones, but they were saturated. So they understood that in order to attract other companies, they needed to build other industrial zones, bigger, larger ones. So this is why that the choice of Tanger Med and the localization of the Renault plant there facilitated many processes and many management systems.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Avant de donner la dernière question à Olivier,
Before giving the floor to Olivier, I would like to underline the one point. Tanger Med today is more than 3,000 hectares. It started at 500 hectares. And it's not the same as other projects. You know, some projects start by more hectares, so it enabled learning. This is why I underscored that it started by different phases. The first phase was Tanger Med 1, and after 3-4 years, we started building Tanger Med 2.
Very quickly on the fertilizer story, which is slightly different because the lead actor in Morocco's fertilizer industry is actually not a foreign multinational, but a state-owned enterprise. I was wondering if you could talk about how OCP has managed to preserve some of the advantages of public ownership in terms of having a long-term vision and long-term investment, coordination, etc., whilst also trying to leverage some of the benefits of private sector management, and whether you think that kind of sweet spot that OCP has reached is maybe something that other countries who are facing this choice between kind of state-owned or privatized, maybe it's like a third way that they can follow.
C'est vrai que vous mettez l'accent sur une des grandes réussites aussi de la.
Here you're talking about one of the biggest success in the Moroccan industry, the process of OCP and the OCP history in this 25 last years. OCP is a state-owned company, and it's a mining company. It produces phosphate, and since the French colonialism up till now, it showcased its capacities not only as a public company, but also as a mining extracting company. These are very important points to be able, for example, to maintain its capacities to produce phosphate and to export it and to negotiate global market contracts, conventions.
Mais en fait, c'était son métier.
But it was its purpose.
Elle ne performait que dans ce métier.
It was its only professional purpose. But after that, it accumulated some deficiencies. Like, for example, within Morocco, for example, the social and territorial development in mining plants. The impact of OCP was considered by local communities and local civil societies as an extraction which benefited to the state, but without any impact on the local communities. So they needed to rethink their mining sites to be able to become engines and levers of development within their territories. Either by, for example, the implementation of a certain number of activities, or by training its employees, and etc. So this was the first problem, and at the start of the 2000s, there was a rise of social unrest. So this was the first problem or issue, how to transform the company to a citizen company that is respectful to its citizens. So the second point was how to promote transformation and the importance of the chain of the value chain. They were exporting phosphate at the start of the 70s. It was the start of the phosphate export, but how it was all about capitalizing on the value chain. Hence, the start of producing fertilizers. And this is what it did through consolidating its first phase, that was the transformation of the phosphoric acid, and the second phase was fertilizers. And today, OCP is exporting maybe more fertilizers than any other product. So to do that, they needed to master the cost, work on export, the price, but also the issue of water management and environment protection, and transforming industrial sites and plants, namely Georges Lesford, that became a fertilizer transformation plant. So OCP became an industrial company and not only a mining company as it started. So to master all the variables, making it competitive globally and in a geopolitical scene extremely difficult. So it faces many challenges, for example, to access the American market and a certain number of African markets with whom they have some not so loyal wars. So OCP needed to master its value chain and its inputs to increase its added value. So this is when they needed a cluster vision, because we needed to develop sites, territories, not only physical development, but also integrating the actors and the different operators in the sector. they, for example, integrated the R&D and the academic world, like, for example, the Ben Gurion University. And OCP, I think, was a visionary, had a vision and was a visionary when it comes to implementing different activities, different disciplines to accompany and to support its strategy. Either it's the industrial one or the innovation or human capital. Hence, the OCP initiative to create the think tank, the PCNS, to empower itself, even though, of course, OCP is self-managed until now. Thank you so much. OCP is a great example of a state-owned company that can be competitive. It's the first, OCP is the first fertilizer, phosphate-based fertilizers in the world. Yes. And I forgot to mention, beyond the transformation of OCP from a mining site to a multi-activity company, it's also about its institutional transformation. The public establishment or company or state-owned company that OCP is today is not what it was 20 years ago.
It has become a limited business, a limited company. It has a capacity to negotiate with the state, with the Minister of Finance. It has the capacity to negotiate, to increase the industrial bases with some planning programs, planning's contract. It's a company being able to negotiate with the state through some planning contract in order to allocate the resources. And more to the point, in my mind, in Morocco, OCP is the only one national champion. We miss national champions in Morocco. Hope that that OCP will pave the way to other national champions in the future.
It was the largest employer in Morocco, OCP, and it's really hard. It's quite competitive to get in. It's not an easy.
Pas facile de rentrer à l'OCP.
Alors, c'est discutable parce qu'en fait, en termes d'effectifs et d'emploi,
Well, it depends.
l'effectif de l'OCP d'aujourd'hui est beaucoup plus bas qu'il y a
OCP staff is lower than some years because there is a internal transformation in terms of competencies, because technicity and engineering to transport fertilizers through the pipeline has made that OCP was overwhelmed by its staff, and it had to cut on staff, on jobs, in order to have a better and sounder and fairer management. It's not now any longer the first employer, but of course there is a new generation, people are leaving, but the staff, it's not the largest staff in Morocco.
Two questions. I hope you found that interesting. I see a lot of hands. Amazing. I'm gonna start here. Joe, Abir.
Je crois qu'il y a M. Walalou qui est un des acteurs de cette
Mr. Walalo is one of the major players to transform Morocco. He used to, he was in the cabinet and was in the cabinet when we emerged. We went through this emergence of this new industrial planning. If you allow me, I would like to express my gratitude and to congratulate Larabi Jaïdi for his great input and for his great delivery. Just to comment upon his delivery, when we talk about the aircraft industry, which is very important, and the car industry, there are three factors. He has highlighted all of them. The first point Somaca, the former government-run institution in the car industry, Somaca existed since 1959. So there is a car culture in Morocco. We knew how to build cars in Morocco. It was assembly line, basically. But we needed to have partners. And that's why what was very important, the OEMs and part suppliers from Japan and China was so important when they located in Morocco. It was prior Renault. So the OEMs were really important. Somaca, what was important was the privatization of Somaca. So what was very, very important indeed was the privatization of Somaca. Renault had already located his factory in Morocco. A Lebanese CEO had a great idea when he wanted to privatize Somaca. It's a very important point. Secondly, that's the relation between Tangier and Renault. Tangier and Renault. Tangier is a success story. But at the beginning, Tangier was built as a transshipment hub, and Renault has transformed Tangier. Tangier has become an exportation port for Morocco. Tangier and Kenitra too, where you have other suppliers, car suppliers. And third point, that's training. Training is utterly important, especially in the aircraft industry and in the automotive industry. And the National Institution for Training was very important. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your great comments. Do we have other questions?
Thank you. Joe Studwell.
Merci.
So I heard the professor refer to the dark side of industrial policy not creating enough jobs in Morocco. And I personally find Moroccan industrial policy somewhat confusing, and perhaps the professor can help me to understand. I came here 4 years ago. I looked at Tanger Med, at the investment zones at Renault, and I asked senior managers what the total capital investment was. And they told me in US dollar terms a total of around $4.8 billion. And I asked at the time what employment creation was, and I was told 85,000 jobs. Now, if you do the maths, that was $60,000 a job, which is very expensive in a country of a GDP per capita of $4,000. And I then thought, well, what about the domestic industrial sector? And I spoke to some very capable Moroccan entrepreneurs with good-sized companies about their operating conditions. And when I looked at electricity prices, I found that Moroccan industrial electricity prices were some of the highest in Africa. I looked at port handling charges in Casablanca and found they were some of the highest in Africa, about $600 just to get a container on the boat. And when I looked at other things like the availability of serviced industrial land, it was not readily available. And my takeaway is that if Morocco targets capital-intensive multinational business in automotive and aerospace and doesn't adequately support domestic industry, it's hardly a surprise if jobs are not being created. In textiles and garments, for instance, as the professor will well know, the sector at the smaller level of firm has been decimated in the last 10, 15 years. So I'm just interested to hear the professor's thoughts about industrial policy across the whole economy.
Thank you. We're going to take 2 more questions and then wrap up. We're a bit late.
Prendre 2 questions supplémentaires et ensuite nous allons devoir conclure. Sir.
Abid, there?
Hi, I'm Abir. I'm a researcher from Oxford. My question is, if you look at Turkey, they have LC Waikiki, Cotton, Mavi, national champions that have gone global. In electronics, they have Arçelik, Beko. Even countries like Vietnam now is trying to have VinFast experimenting. So on your point of national champions, I'm curious, when will we see Moroccan national champions in sectors like garments and automotives, and why is that not happening yet?
Thank you, Abid. I think there is a last question here.
Merci beaucoup, Mohamed Doumbouya de la Guinée.
Mohamed Doumbouya from Guinea.
Mais quand j'entends Monsieur
When
Jaïdi
I hear Mr. Jaïdi, I really appreciate it. Reminds me to my classes of political and economic classes when I used to attend the university in Morocco. I'm happy to have Mr. Ouelalou in the audience because he used to be my teacher in the banking institution. What we need to remember is the political stability. This is very important. The political stability was at the basis of all the reforms that have been implemented. Mr. Jaïdi said something very important about the structure of investment and the role played by the state. And the state made it possible thanks to the OCP, thanks to the Banque Populaire, and even more, thanks to the deposit box. The Moroccan savings was a great asset to develop the Moroccan economy. This is something which is very important. So there is a nexus between the stability and the development. Reforms and governance that will be implemented will be made when the institutions are stable. And it was my delivery, and thanks for your attention.
Je vais prendre une dernière question de l'INSEE. There.
Hello, Lindsay Whitfield from Copenhagen Business School. Thank you so much for talking about these cases. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the current strategy towards the electric vehicle transition. I know that Morocco has one, and I know that it does put also more emphasis on local firm participation, and I know that there is a significant number of Chinese investments in EV battery and battery active components, and that OCP also hopes to be a player in that, so I was just hoping that you would say a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we have the first question on the focus on capital-intensive industries, the national champions, political stability, and then electric vehicles.
Merci pour l'intérêt que vous avez porté à ce débat.
Thanks for your interest.
Est-ce qu'on peut dire que la politique industrielle marocaine
Can we say that the industrial Moroccan policy is directed toward the attractivity of big international businesses, especially in the aircraft and the automotive car, and that's why we have those success stories with such very expensive factors, as the gentleman highlighted it. It is right. The labor cost in Morocco compared to the developing countries is even higher. The power cost is due to the fact that Morocco imports energy. Morocco has no gas nor oil resources, and that the electricity is made out of the gas, imported gas. We made a huge job in order to better manage the power and electricity ecosystems, to open it to private actors in order to differentiate between distribution and production in order to build a competition. And I think that we are going on the right way regarding the power price, the power rates. But of course, the energy is important. That's why it is so high.
Sur le foncier,
About the real estate now,
il y a plusieurs types de foncier destinés.
we have a different kind of real estate for industrial parks. Regarding land and properties, we have different industrial parks. Some are for government-run actors and others for private actors in order to build new generation industrial parks.
Et j'en passe. Avec un coût du foncier qui est aménagé par l'État.
The property rate is managed by the government, and the evolution of the property and land rate has evolved. It used to be about selling properties and lands to international and local actors, but today this is rather renting land and properties, offering more flexibility. So the operator doesn't have an entry cost which is too high. So when we talk about land and property management, there is some choices, some options and levers are being activated, and we adapt, taking into consideration the international challenges. However, your first point and the main point is about the Moroccan domestic company in this environment, in this momentum.
J'ai cité tout à l'heure que les opérateurs essayaient.
I said that drivers, stakeholders were trying to embark the Moroccan businesses in the value chain when those same Moroccan businesses are competitive enough in order to address the international markets and international competition. And today, the Moroccan companies, Moroccan businesses should work, should upgrade, should ramp up. If we're talking about size, the industrial fabric or the industrial Moroccan company, this is 87%, 90% SMEs, small and medium enterprises and businesses. So competitiveness today, and most of them are family businesses. You have some assets when we talk about family businesses, about capital stability, but in the same time, this capital stability and the openness of this stability cannot help the company, the family business, to ramp up. So the main challenge for the family company is about the capital transmission. So indeed, there is an issue in Morocco for Moroccan businesses when we talk about transmission of ownership, the ownership transmission. So we need to build this fabric. Second point, we need to create, to sign deals and agreements between major leaders in the domestic market and small and medium businesses. More to the point, how to create consortiums to try to address the international markets. The consortium is very important, and that's why Moroccan companies should build consortium in order to address the international markets. This is something that we need to work on. So now, is Morocco doesn't have any automotive champion very easily. Just to be honest, years ago, 3 years, 4 years ago, we noticed in Morocco the Moroccan car, a small saloon car.
Mais
But
je vous interpelle. Quels sont dans les pays
one
du Sud
point,
les pays qui ont réussi
in which
véritablement à
southern
avoir
countries,
une
which
industrie
southern country
auto-
manage
autonome,
to have a national car industry
à la fois de maîtrise des processus de fabrication,
from the manufacturing standpoint,
d'exploitation locales,
from
et de
the
marque.
local business standpoint, and from the brand
L'exemple
standpoint?
coréen
Very
n'est pas
few.
un exemple
The Southern Korean success story
qui a,
is not,
etc.
doesn't have many of them. Hyundai, Daewoo, it's just a tiny evolution of the global car industry. Today, in a developing countries, the car industry can only be done in a partnership with other international leaders. But what is very important is to be able to negotiate with those big leaders, not only about developing the outsourcing fabric, but to capture the know-how on some key factors, key sectors, to move towards the electric car.
Aujourd'hui, Peugeot
and Renault have started
ont mis en place
by implementing hybrid cars.
électriques.
Then they moved to electric cars,
Autorisation de la petite voiture. Et aujourd'hui,
engineering small cars, and now they are trying to level up, to ramp up their processes.
Je terminerai sur une chose sur le textile.
Just one final point about textile and the garment industry.
On ne crée pas suffisamment de marché.
Why
Le travail
why
n'est pas
don't
suffisamment attractif.
why is the job market enough attractive in
C'est
Morocco?
vrai que
Just to answer this
la
point,
stratégie marocaine est
the Moroccan
restée
strategy mainly focused
sur ces deux grands secteurs.
on those two sectors, two industries. It doesn't mean that the ecosystems have not moved, have not leveled up.
Parce que la pharmacie, il y a des changements importants.
The pharmaceutical industry has went through some huge change and transformation. Same thing for the fertilizing industry. However, for the garment industry, there is an issue because we are positioned downstream in the outsourcing, and we got rid of everything upstream,
Inscrit dans une réforme
which is about sewing
textile avec des donneurs d'ordre.
and especially the weaving and the weaving industry. So today,
Aujourd'hui, notre marché
our market,
de l'habit
the garment market, the clothing market, is completely captured by the Turkish offer because Turkey managed to master the overall industry. They have a cotton industry, they have weaving, they have a huge capacity to the spinning mill industry. We have some great success stories abroad, but we have the capacity to completely master the whole value chain as far as the clothing industry is involved.
Hopefully contagious. Thank you so much for listening. I know we took a bit more time, but hopefully that was interesting. There is so much to say about the Moroccan experience, and we would love to go more in details for other countries as well to learn about what to do and what not to do as well. But thank you so much for listening, and we're going to take now a break for the next session. Thank you.
Esteemed speakers, please remain on the stage for the group photo.